Watch right now on the Front News project. Hundreds of drones over Moscow, the capital of the Russian Federation, shook from the explosion. Drones breached the Belgorod dam, putting 4 Russian brigades at risk of flooding. And this is just the beginning. And now Putin is starting a war against the Baltic countries. Who will be the first target of the Kremlin terrorists? Fiery, hot, and blazing. Watch frontline footage right now. Hello, this is Sergei Malnev with you, and we're starting right away with the main topic. The fire of retribution has ignited in Moscow. Ukrainian drones caused a stir in Putin's capital and its surroundings. Dozens of UAVs attacked Moscow, and dozens of explosions rocked the Russian capital. Domodedovo and Zhukovsky airports have suspended operations. And this is just the beginning. Let's look at all the details.
Pickups with machine guns mounted on the roof along the perimeter of the Kremlin. It's unlikely that Putin and his generals expected to see such a scene in the 4th year of the war. This past weekend, Moscow and the surrounding region came under a massive drone attack. At night, Domodedovo and Zhukovsky airports were temporarily closed. By morning, their operations had been restored. During the attack in the Kommunarka area, explosions were heard and smoke was seen rising above the forest. All night long. Moscow Mayor Sobyanin wrote about the downed drones on his Telegram channel. Other Russian public channels also reported on the large-scale drone attack.
SU is attempting a massive attack on Moscow and the region. Within a couple of hours, 14 drones heading for the capital were destroyed. Explosions in the sky were heard in Domodedovo, Podolsk, Dubna, Ramenskoye, Kommunarka, Troitsk, and Kolomna. At Zhukovsky and Domodedovo airports, 5 flights were cancelled and 6 were rescheduled. Restrictions on departures and arrivals have been introduced. In
the Moscow region, a massive fire broke out at the Serpukhov oil depot as a result of a drone strike. The Russian Ministry of Defense reported that nearly 200 attack drones were shot down overnight.
This is not the first time that Russians themselves have recorded more than 40 drones heading toward Moscow. We are precisely trying to bypass the capital's air defense system, which is now deployed directly there. But we do understand that all of this exists, specific retaliatory strikes and probing actions, probing to determine how to deliver a more effective combined strike.
Recently, Western media published a map of the air defense systems protecting the capital of the Russian Federation. But even through such dense defenses, Ukrainian drones managed to slip through. Because of this dense protection of Moscow, other regions and strategic facilities across Russia are suffering.
Analysts clarify that the systems are constantly being relocated. But the majority are concentrated around Moscow, St. Petersburg, and Putin's residence in Valdai. There simply aren't enough systems to protect oil refineries and other strategic facilities in the regions. This is exactly what the Ukrainian armed forces are taking advantage of. In
the Moscow region, explosions were heard near the airfield where Russian strategic aviation is based. The Sheikovka Strategic Aviation Air Base and Kaluga Airport in Russia's Kaluga region were also under attack. This is not the first massive drone attack on Moscow and other regions, even though the Russian Ministry of Defense always underreports the number of drones. Almost 200. That's a significant number, and it will only continue to grow.
This has a very serious anti-propaganda effect directly for the Kremlin. Let me remind you that one of the reasons for launching the so-called special military operation was the issue of guaranteeing the security of the Russian Federation itself, as Putin and his inner circle explained. We can see how the war is coming directly to Moscow. And not just to Muscovites. We see that the geography of Ukraine's drone attacks is expanding.
Before the start of the so-called special military operation, drones did not terrorize ordinary Russians, let alone Muscovites. Now, however, air raid alerts throughout the night are becoming a routine occurrence for Moscow. And perhaps now Russians will have questions and complaints for the master of the Kremlin.
And now let's analyze the operational situation on the blazing Pokrovsk front line. Putin's army continues its terror here. On the Pokrovsk direction, the enemy carried out 31 attacks. The occupiers tried to advance near populated areas. Nekonorovka, Mernograd, Rodinskaya, Lisovka, Zverevo, Udakhnaya, Molodetskaya, Krasny Liman, Novoekonomichnaya, Kotlina, Novopavlovka, Dakhnaya. 4 combat clashes are still ongoing. According to preliminary estimates, today in this direction our soldiers eliminated 58 occupiers and wounded 25. Meanwhile, nuclear threats are once again coming from the Kremlin. In response to the most severe sanctions from the US, Putin is brandishing his nuclear Burevestnik and conducting exercises. But is that very Burevestnik really as terrifying and effective as the Russian dictator and his court propaganda paint it to be? Experts say that there are already many questions piling up about the new Wunderwaffe of the bunker dweller. What exactly are they? We'll tell you now.
The Kremlin has once again boasted about its superweapon. Another one with no analogs for intimidation and propaganda.
They're short on gasoline, factories are burning, the country's finances are a complete mess, and so on. Yet they keep trying to test some kind of super weapon, another one of their so-called Wunderwaffes. This time,
they brought out the nuclear missile Burevestnik into the spotlight, and it was Putin himself who did it. He said that they supposedly conducted tests of this nuclear cruise missile. Naturally, they were successful.
After all, this is a unique product that no one else in the world has. Moreover, I remember perfectly well when we announced that we were developing such a weapon. Even then, specialists of the highest level and class, who are recognized for their expertise and years of experience, told me that yes, the goal is good and worthy, and it is something to be admired and respected. However, they also made it clear that, at least for the foreseeable future, achieving this goal is not possible. They explained that there are many challenges and obstacles that make it unachievable right now. And now, after all the hard work and dedication, the decisive test, which was an important milestone in this process, has finally been completed.
The Burevestnik tests themselves supposedly took place on October 21st, according to Gerasimov's report. The results were supposed to inspire fear.
During the flight, the missile performed all the required vertical and horizontal maneuvers, and thereby demonstrated high capabilities in bypassing missile defense and air defense systems.
How many thousands of kilometers?
14,000.
14,000, and how long was it in the air?
Well, about 15 hours.
And that's not the limit?
Not the limit.
Obviously, this is how the terrorist state is responding to the sanctions imposed by the United States, and it would sound threatening if not for one nuance. It's the Russians themselves who should be afraid. The Burevestnik is by no means a new missile. Its development began in Russia back in 2001. However, it was Putin who publicly announced it, only in 2018. At that time, he claimed that the Burevestnik had an unlimited range and its flight path could be unpredictable. It would be worth clarifying what the consequences of a launch might be. After all, it's not for nothing. In the US, the Burevestnik was nicknamed the Flying Chernobyl. Vernobyl.
A missile is dangerous because if the reactor is destroyed, if it's shut down, or if it crashes or has an accident, the area will be contaminated, a fairly large area. And no sane person wants that. That's why the Americans abandoned this anti-environmental project back then.
The Kremlin wasn't interested in the consequences, so the development continued, and eventually a disaster did happen.
remember, there was an explosion in Neonoxa, some kind of nuclear, unclear, not exactly nuclear, but some strange explosion after which the radiation level in Severodvinsk suddenly spiked. They say that it was their Burevestnik missile that blew up.
This incident happened in 2019. It was at that time that the tests ended in a radioactive disaster. Employees of Rosatom and the Ministry of Defense were killed. However, this is far from the first case, and certainly not the last. When nuclear missile tests went far off plan, most recently, just in September of last year, another so-called unparalleled armata exploded. It exploded during a launch in the silo. Satellite images at the time recorded severe damage to the launch complex at the missile silo site. A huge crater. Returning to the Burevestnik, up until now there have been reports of 13 missile tests. Of those, only one is considered successful. On that occasion, the missile flew 35 kilometers, and the longest Burevestnik flight lasted only 2 minutes. That was precisely when it covered those same 35 kilometers. At the same time, the Kremlin, of course, never missed a chance to boast about successful tests without providing any evidence. Putin himself claimed a successful Burevestnik flight. Then in October of 2023, all of this, of course, was accompanied solely by words.
And even if we assume, I'm not going to get into any special details or anything like that right now, that they actually managed to do it, even if we suppose they succeeded with a single unit, maybe two, it's something like the Oreshnik, which hardly anyone has actually seen yet, right? So even if they managed to make just one such missile, what's the point of it?
Trump reacted instantly to the statement about the Burevestnik exercises and was not impressed by the nuclear club. On the contrary, he reminded everyone that there is a nuclear submarine off the Russian coast. And he called on Putin to focus on ending the war he started against Ukraine rather than on missile tests. I
do not think what Putin is saying is appropriate. He should put an end to the war, a war that was supposed to last 1 week but is now in its 4th year. That's what he should be doing instead of testing missiles.
But the Kremlin has no plans to stop its nuclear games. On the contrary, they are even threatening that the missile will soon be put into service with the Russian army. Putin has ordered preparations for the missile. It is expected that this could happen in 2 years, that is in 2027. But is there actually anything to deploy?
Now let's move to the Alexandrovsky direction of the front. In this area, the aggressor also tries to destroy, kill, and maim. In the Alexandrivsky direction, Ukrainian units stopped 11 attacks by the occupiers in the areas of the branch's populated areas. Sosnovka, Novogorovka, Arestopol, Pavlovka. There is currently one military clash ongoing. Russia is ready to invade the Baltic states. This is being widely reported, including by the Western press. The Kremlin is essentially following the Ukraine 2022 scenario. Under the guise of fighting invented Nazism, Russia, having probed the weaknesses of NATO's eastern flank, is on the verge of invading Latvia. Our journalists have investigated when exactly this might happen.
Representatives of NATO countries, particularly in Europe, and especially in smaller countries, really need to understand exactly what they're dealing with.
After Ukraine, it's the Baltics.
When Russian people are simply thrown out across the border, you see, these are very serious matters that directly affect the security of our country.
Vladimir Putin is a threat not only to Ukraine's security, but also to independent states. Latvia officially denied permission for Putin's plane to fly through its airspace. This decision is not just a diplomatic gesture, it's a direct reminder to the Kremlin that for the civilized world, Putin is the subject of a Hague court warrant. And this was followed by a new provocation from the Kremlin. Russian military aircraft violated Lithuanian airspace. NATO fighter jets were scrambled to intercept.
This is a blatant violation of international law and Lithuania's territorial integrity. This once again confirms the importance of strengthening the readiness of European air defense forces.
Before this, Russian fighter jets were over Estonia. 2 more Russian aircraft appeared over the Petro-Baltic oil and gas platform in the Baltic Sea. Russia intensified provocations against NATO countries in September. The Kremlin systematically uses hybrid forms of aggression.
In 3 months, Russia produces as much ammunition as all NATO countries combined. In a year, we expect that the Russian military-industrial complex will produce 1,500 tanks, 3,000 armored vehicles, and 200 missiles this year, Iskander. And in just 5 years, Russia could be ready to go to war against NATO.
For Putin, seizing Ukraine is not the goal, but a stage. His plans involve resurrecting the Soviet sphere of influence, where the independence of neighboring countries is seen as only a temporary misunderstanding.
Here are the countries that were considered the most unfriendly, where in fact there are a lot of relocants, and yet Putin received 56.82% of the vote. In Estonia, 75.22%. In Latvia, 70.6%.
In addition to military provocations, Russians are carrying out various cyber attacks.
Estonia plans to increase its military spending to 5.4% of GDP over the next 4 years. And right now, Estonia is already strengthening its border with our country.
Russia can come up with hundreds of pretexts for an invasion. The Kremlin has already found familiar narratives for the Baltic countries to justify its invasion.
In fact, it really can be called fascism. Then, the authorities are doing everything possible to forcibly assimilate, including ethnic Russians and other peoples. Therefore, of course, everything that is happening now in Latvia is a tragedy. Gito, in fact, there are the same kind of criminals there.
They openly declare the liberation of brotherly peoples, the granting of additional rights and freedoms, as well as support for Russian speakers. Already today, in the narratives of Kremlin propaganda, Narva is portrayed as a city where Russians are actively oppressed by Estonians.
The Russian language is not taught as such, not even as an elective. And that's why I'm changing jobs, moving to an Orthodox gymnasium where the Russian language and culture are preserved.
The Kremlin has already outlined plans to increase military production and deploy additional troops along their borders. This is reported by the Institute for the Study of War.
Kremlin officials continue to apply the same approach to the Baltic countries, the same narratives that Russia has used to justify its invasions of former Soviet republics over the past 3 decades.
The Kremlin continues to look for pretexts. The next excuse could be the Moscow-Kaliningrad passenger train, which passes through Lithuanian territory. The Kremlin is quite capable of using it as a pretext for invasion under the guise of saving peaceful citizens.
No, there is no sense of alarm. There is an expectation of trouble.
There could be a provocation staged in the Suwałki corridor on the border between Lithuania and Poland.
This enclave is a real trap for Russia. The shortest supply route for troops there is by land, through Polish territory, past the city of Suwałki. In the west, it is believed that if war breaks out, Russia will definitely want to break through at this spot, a corridor to supply the Kaliningrad region. In
Putin's vision of the world, not only the Baltic states and Ukraine must submit to Russia, but also parts of Poland and Finland.
If Russia really wants to seize the Baltic states, it will have to do so very quickly. The threatened period, which usually precedes a war, will need to be shortened as much as possible in order not to reveal its intentions.
Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia are concerned about Russia's increasing military spending. That is why they are developing evacuation plans for their million-strong population in the event of a Russian invasion. At the same time, they firmly believe that NATO's Article 5 will still work.
We've been having this conversation since February 2022, or even since March 2014, when Russia first attacked Ukraine and annexed Crimea. The US is no longer willing to defend Europe, as I say, for free. They want Europeans to do their share of the work. I believe this is the right thing. Of course, it's not easy because you have to cut losses. For example, less funding goes to education, healthcare, and social security. But we, as a frontline state, understand what's at stake. And coming back to Article 5, people often bring up the Budapest Memorandum. They compare Ukraine and NATO guarantees. But there is a difference, and it's very significant. Ukraine is not a member of the alliance, and the fact that Russia is so vehemently opposed to Ukraine joining NATO and receiving Article 5 guarantees, to me that's proof. Article 5 works.
The scenario of a sudden strike on the alliance's eastern flank is no longer a fantasy. It's becoming a matter of time and the West's readiness to respond. Latvia has tightened its migration rules. Those Russians who failed the exam or did not submit their documents for EU permanent resident status on time in Latvia are required to leave the country. In addition, starting November 1st, irregular bus passenger transport from Latvia to Russia and Belarus will be prohibited. On the border with Russia, wetlands and peat bogs will be restored to create a natural barrier for troops in the event of aggression. For now, NATO remains confident that an open conflict with Russia can be avoided, at least while the Kremlin is preoccupied with the war against Ukraine. However, history teaches us that what seemed impossible yesterday can become reality today.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
And now, an analysis of the operational situation on the southern Slobozhansky and Lyman directions of the front. The enemy army, and here, as usual, they're true to form. In the southern Slobozhansky direction, the enemy assaulted the positions of our units in the areas of the settlements of Volchansk, Kamenka, as well as towards Balagovka. Ukrainian units repelled 7 attacks. 5 combat engagements are still ongoing. In the Lyman direction, Ukrainian soldiers stopped 5 attacks in the areas of the settlements of Nadezhda, Novoselovka, and Zarekhnaya, and Shandrigolovaya as well. 2 combat engagements are still ongoing. And in general, Putin needs more cannon fodder at the front, given the colossal losses in his army. He doesn't even shy away from deceit, driving completely inexperienced Russian conscripts into the war. About this scheme and what conscripts and their families should pay attention to first and foremost, more in our exclusive report.
People, my fellow countrymen, all of them could now walk, talk, do things. They could have had more children, perhaps expanding their family. In short, they could have truly benefited their fellow citizens, making a positive difference in the lives of those around them.
More than 1 million losses in the Russian army since 2022. Cemeteries are overflowing, contract payments have been reduced, and commanders are stealing the death benefits. Over the past 2 years, the number of contract signings in the Russian Federation has dropped to a minimum. Pokrovsk has been under assault for a year now, with enormous losses being paid as the price. So where do they find new people for Putin's war? A scheme of covert mobilization has been uncovered in Russia. The Russian Ministry of Defense has resorted to extreme measures. They are sending young people to the slaughter. We
signed the contract on July 5th, 2025, under psychological pressure from Junior Lieutenant Dasha Dorshev.
Specifically, he intimidated us, saying that if we stayed on conscription, we would be sent to Kursk. And in Kursk, if people are sent to Kursk, well, conscripts, only 70% of them come back. And 30% die there.
Conscription is a hidden mobilization. Today in Russia, conscripts are becoming a significant force that the authorities are throwing into the so-called special military operation.
There are people from my draft, my friends, who were wounded, shell-shocked, or killed. They were hit with blue shrapnel.
Cases of conscripts being forced to sign military contracts continue. One of them was Andrei Smirnov.
51st Railway Brigade. I declare that I do not want to sign a military contract. If a contract appears with my signature, I was forced. It was signed under psychological or physical pressure, or by fraudulent means.
195,000 rubles were deposited into his bank card. It turned out that this was the first payment under a contract that, as it turned out, had been drawn up in his name. Smirnov claims that the document itself was handwritten and signed by someone else. Other young men, however, cannot withstand the psychological pressure from commanders who try to persuade them to agree to go to war instead of returning home to their families.
He said, so it turns out no one will be waiting for me at home. My friends will all disappear. My parents, on the contrary, will send me to work and no one will be there to watch over me or to take care of me at all. That means I won't be needed by anyone and I'll just stay that way, alone and without anyone to rely on or to look after me.
They are beaten, deprived of sleep, and cut off from contact with their loved ones. In some cases, those who refused were even shot at with air guns.
Contracts are signed for conscripts without telling them. They are then formally sent to war as official contract soldiers. I'm not saying this without evidence. There was a major scandal about this recently this year in Chebakul near the Chelyabinsk region. In the Chelyabinsk region, there is a well-known military unit where, under pressure from relatives' appeals, the prosecutor's office itself concealed and admitted that there had been falsifications by the command to force conscripts to sign contracts.
Bringing in conscripts allows contract soldiers and mercenaries to be freed up for new offensives.
They're only 18 years old, they have no combat experience, they don't even have any real-life experience. How can they help at the front? In
Russian military units, there is an unofficial plan to recruit contract soldiers from among the conscripts. We
have evidence of people being locked in overheated drying rooms and kept there for a long time until they agreed to sign a contract. People from Kuzbas told me that one conscript managed to resist such pressure and was able not to sign the contract. But at what cost? His femoral head was broken and he was discharged early from the army. So he didn't sign the contract, but he was left disabled. And yet people consider this case a success. These are the kinds of successes we have.
The mother of another Russian conscript said that her son signed a contract for military service. After he was pressured into it,
he explained to me saying, "Mom, I don't even understand myself how it happened. That's just how it turned out. I never wanted to sign a contract."
When he submitted a report refusing the contract, it was not accepted, and they claimed that signing the contract had been voluntary. In Primorsky Krai, conscripts who refuse to sign a contract are subjected to collective punishment by having other servicemen set against them.
A conscript was forced to sign a contract through coercion and through moral and psychological pressure. The child doesn't want to go. He will be sent to the special military operation. The child is only 18 years old, and he signed it involuntarily. This coercion was against his will. He had no intention and did not want to sign this contract. They told him, "You have no choice. You'll sign it anyway."
The mother didn't know that her son had been taken to war. He thought he would end up in a security unit, but he found himself in Mariupol.
We don't know where our son is at the present moment. At the moment, we have messages, screenshots with him, audio recordings, video recordings, conversations where he confirms that he signed the contract under pressure against his own will.
Right now, conscription into the Russian army is taking place in annexed Crimea.
You are now proudly joining the distinguished ranks of the brave defenders of our beloved motherland, our homeland.
Conscripts, both from Russia and from the occupied territories, are forced to sign a military contract within the first months of service so that there is a legal basis to send them to war. In addition, law enforcement uses conscript soldiers in battalions tasked with shooting down drones.
Bro, for example, we're on conscript duty. I'm serving, so in Yalta, the guys, conscripts, right? 3 of them, I think, were killed and 16 wounded. Wounded soldiers, just conscripts. Drones flew in. And here too, they fly around pretty often. And imagine the guys are shooting down drones, and they don't even get paid for it. Can you believe it? Even though they said, like, if you shoot down drones, you'll get paid well.
According to human rights activists, the number of yesterday's conscripts who become contract soldiers and are sent to war is classified.
About 300,000 per year. People are drafted for compulsory service, but even if a third of them sign a contract, that's about 100,000 new contracts. This kind of forced recruitment is ongoing all the time.
The Russian Ministry of Defense, in order to fulfill Putin's order, is plugging holes at the front with 18-year-old boys. But no one can help them avoid this. After all, Putin isn't even trying to stop the bloody slaughter.
Well then, let's now discuss the operational situation in the Sloviansk and Kostiantynivka directions. The situation here is also extremely tense. In the Sloviansk direction, our defenders successfully repelled 10 attempts by the occupiers to advance in the areas of Yampol, Serebryanka, Siversk and Vyemka. 2 more clashes are still ongoing. In the Kostiantynivka direction, the occupiers launched 11 assaults today on our defenders' positions near Shcherbinivka, Rusiny Yar, Katrinivka and Sofiyivka. The defense forces repelled all enemy attacks. The Kremlin is creating a pretty picture of Russian prisoners of war returning from Ukraine, but that's about it. Because in reality, Russian prisoners of war are sent straight back to the front after an exchange. Why don't Putin's military commanders allow their captured conscripts to stay in the rear? What's the point of immediately sending them back to die in Ukraine? You'll understand everything in a moment.
Russian flags, smiling faces and neat clothing. This is how the Kremlin portrays the return of Russian prisoners of war to their homeland.
Inside, I'm overwhelmed with emotions, very pleasant, warm feelings that I'll see my family, relatives, children, and loved ones.
But will he? Because the happiness didn't last long. Did you go home after you returned?
No.
Do your parents know that you were captured a second time?
Yes, they know.
How?
I wrote them a letter, and...
How did it happen that you didn't make it home but ended up back in captivity?
They sent me back to the war immediately.
But before sending prisoners of war back to their deaths, they can still be tormented for another 2 hours with interrogations and polygraph tests in FSB units.
It's surprising that it's so little that they last so short. Because let me remind you, today's Putin regime is the successor of Stalin's regime.
And what's also amusing is that the time spent in captivity doesn't count toward the contract term. Interesting tactic by the Kremlin, isn't it?
Putin just doesn't have enough cannon fodder. That's why everyone who can stand on their feet and take part in these meat assaults will be sent to these meat assaults. And accordingly, it's only natural for Putin that everyone who is exchanged will be sent back to the front. And no one is planning to let them go anywhere, because these are already the slaves that the regime has recorded as its own slaves.
And of course, there is no rest, no meeting with relatives, or God forbid, any rehabilitation provided for in Russia. After all, you haven't fulfilled your duty to the end.
Just imagine, for a moment, that they come home after being held captive by Ukraine, and they start telling what is happening at the front and what happened to them while they were prisoners in Ukraine. How they lived, actually ate, took walks, watched TV, read books, did what they enjoyed. And what will people say about Ukrainians after hearing their stories? Can you really let them interact with others? No, you can't. They have to be killed immediately.
Also, everyone who goes to the so-called special military operation has a choice. Everyone is given instructions on how to act so as not to be captured.
At first I thought it was a joke, you know, just some army thing. But actually, Siri, it's not a joke at all.
These are several different ways that I should commit suicide in the unfortunate event that I am at risk of being captured by someone. And
also, in principle, Russia creates the most comfortable conditions possible for its soldiers and provides everything they need. But apparently water didn't make it onto that list.
we drink whatever we can and we'll figure it out as we go.
Apparently, Putin doesn't really care about getting his own citizens back.
Putin doesn't even consider them people. To him, they're just cannon fodder. And whether they have water or not doesn't matter to him. Well, if there's no water, they'll just drink from puddles. But the main thing is go and die for the Führer. Yes, Putin really does think there are plenty of people. And Russia's mobilization reserve is indeed large. He believes that his police apparatus, the FSB, the police, and so on, is enough to drag anyone to war, anyone they need, whenever they need them. And that's why he doesn't feel sorry for anyone at all.
But there are some who do manage to return home after the war. Apparently, they were lucky enough not to be captured or poisoned by the supposedly crystal clear water from the ground.
Contract soldiers can have a set term, and when their contract ends, they can return. But of course, if someone was already in prison before the war, their mental state wasn't great to begin with. And after fighting in the war, they completely lost it, so there's nothing surprising about that. Let's remember that Putin doesn't consider anyone human, so there's no need to care about them, and they receive no psychological help.
At first, they promised to come back, and not empty-handed either. We'll come back.
With victory.
But in the situation of fighting to the death on the front lines for Putin's dreams, it would be good just to come back at all. But unfortunately, even that isn't provided for in Russia itself.
That's all for today. But very soon on Front News you'll see new, unique reports from our journalists in the hottest spots of the war, gathered so that you know the truth. This was Sergei Malnev with you. Take care of yourselves and your loved ones.